it's not just what you do like about a particular design or style. It's oftentimes what you don't like that is as important.
Hello and welcome to the Business of Architecture. Today we will be speaking with the studio director of Weissmann Architecture, Tom Wynn. So Tom has a passion for inspiring young architects in the classical tradition of architecture, and he enjoys extolling the virtues of fine craftsmanship. He is a strong believer in empowering young designers to discover their personal and professional interests and identify their strengths so that they may confidently evolve into serious architects. In his 7-year tenure with Weissmann Architecture, Wynn has enjoyed serving as a mentor, helping staff members develop into accomplished architects who design classic architecture beautifully and properly. And in practice, he values a balance between beautiful design and practical merit, all of which he shares with the firm's young architects. Most recently, Tom is helping to produce an ICAA, an Institute of Classical Architecture and Art event at the Bradley Symphony Center in Milwaukee, and has a new residential build currently under construction. In today's episode, we will be discussing listening for what clients actually want, not just what they say they want. We discuss the art of mentoring the next generation of architects, and we talk about marketing and finding ideal clients. So sit back, relax, and enjoy Tom Wynn. One of the most difficult parts about running your architecture practice is making sure you're getting the right fee for the job. We hear small architecture firm owners ask all the time, how do I know what my competitors are charging? How do I know if I'm charging the right fees? Guesstimating fees can be very risky. If you undercharge, you get to the end of the fee and there's still more job left to do. Then you find yourself either robbing Peter to pay Paul or stealing from a more profitable project to support a less profitable project. On the flip side, you probably don't want to charge your clients more than you actually need in order to get the project done. The industry has been lacking this resource for too long. We constantly hear firm owners talk about how great it would be to have some sort of guide or comparison about what architecture firms actually charge. Is my pricing right? How do I know if it's right? They go to Google, but end up with outdated or inaccurate information, or what they find doesn't quite seem to fit the flow of their firm's specific approach or demographics. So we've decided to fix this problem ourselves and create this long overdue resource for you. Ever since we founded Business of Architecture over 10 years ago, this has been one of the most common questions we get. So we are really excited about this. By December of this year, we will be launching the first stage of a comprehensive architecture fee report that will reveal what architecture practices around the world are actually charging and how they set their fees. You'll get to see if others are charging a percentage of construction cost, a stipulated sum, or an hourly rate, along with the associated amounts based on the type of project, their geographical location, and other demographics. Now, one of the advantages of us taking this on as a consulting agency is we can actually put out this kind of information. A couple of decades ago, some may remember that the AIA got into big trouble because they published something similar. The United States Justice Department decided that this was considered price fixing, causing a monopoly, and they shut it down. But since Business of Architecture is not a membership organization and not representing architecture as a whole, we are not limited in discussing fees. Because it is our mission to help architectural practices succeed, we are very excited about gathering and providing this information to all of you in the industry. Keep an eye out in your inbox for more details coming soon. If you're not already on our email list, head over to thebusinessofarchitecture.com, sign up for our free live video training, and watch for your inbox for more details from there. Those on our mailing list will be the first to get notified when we release the architecture fee report. So if you're a small architecture practice owner, you are finally going to get to see very clearly what other similar sized firms with similar demographics and similar project types are actually charging and how they are setting their fees. This podcast is produced by Business of Architecture, a leading business consultancy for architects and design professionals. This episode is sponsored by Smart Practice, Business of Architecture's flagship program to help you structure your firm for freedom, fulfillment, and financial profit. If you want access for our free training on how to do this, please visit smartpracticemethod.com. or if you want to speak directly to one of our advisors about how we might be able to help you, please follow the link in the information. Tom, welcome to the Business of Architecture. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you, Ryan. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. So, very interesting. We were just starting the conversation here, and I think this is a nice way in, and we'll find out more as we go along here. But we were talking about, would you consider yourself a classicist? Looking in the context of Wade Weissmann architecture, and that's what the practice is known for. Is this what you consider yourself?
So that is an interesting question. I would say, with regards to Wade Weissmann architecture, we certainly do execute work which I would say falls within the classical tradition. A lot of times it falls within a more traditional vernacular, not always strictly informed by classical planning principles or details.
Right.
My personal background, I did not originate in architecture school as a classicist, quite to the contrary. I attended the University of Cincinnati and graduated in 96. And at the time that I was a student there, Peter Eisenman was actually constructing an addition to our School of Architecture. And so, as you can imagine, that was a huge influence on myself and the rest of my classmates. Interestingly, one of my sixth-year studio thesis professors was actually the project manager who was in charge for overseeing the execution of construction of the School of Architecture while I was there, a guy named Mike McInturf. And he was really a wonderful, wonderful person to work with and taught me a lot about Eisenman's sort of deconstructivist philosophy in architecture. But it wasn't really until I left Cincinnati after working with a company called RWA Architects. I actually interned with RWA as a student for a couple of years, and then ultimately joined them full time after graduation. And we were working on very high-end residential projects throughout Cincinnati and ultimately Indianapolis areas. And I think it was the August of 1998 episode of Architectural Digest that had this phenomenal hickory library on the cover. And it was a library within a house that was designed and built by a fellow named Thomas Beebe. So Thomas Beebe had designed this phenomenal house in a suburb of Chicago, and I was absolutely enchanted by the authenticity of the details that I saw in the millwork and the cabinetry in this house. And I set my sights on working for him. And as the University of Cincinnati was a school with a co-op program, essentially we had roughly 4 years of academic course time and 2 years of internship. So starting in the second year of school, our class would split into two halves, and we would start alternating work, study, work, study, work, study, all the way until we got to our sixth year. And people would take internships at architecture firms all over the country and in some cases internationally. And so I had a friend of mine who was working in Chicago at the time who had a friend who worked for the company at that point was called Hammond, Beebe and Babka. Later became Hammond, Beebe, Rupert Ainge, and is now HBRA, as a lot of those original characters have since moved into retirement. But that was essentially how I got my into HBB or HBRA. And I started working on a house in Concord, Massachusetts, or just outside of Concord, Massachusetts, that was essentially a Georgian, almost Palladian style residence. And I worked directly with Tom for about 4 years on that project. And it was really in that particular project that I came to embrace a lot of the classical, essentially the classical paradigms, or that level of authenticity that I think you see taught academically in schools like the University of Notre Dame, here in Indiana.
Yeah, it's a very interesting. I mean, I've interviewed a couple of classicists in the past. In here in the UK, Francis Terry, son of Quinlan Terry, visited his office, and I was really, really impressed with the business structure behind the kind of classical model, because there's so much about the actual style and the architectural language that allows for a lot of efficiency. And they're kind of like lots of standard details, or there's and also from a marketing perspective, it's a lot clearer than a lot of modern practices.
I think that it's almost easier to sell, because there's something about traditional and classical architecture that's immediately recognizable and familiar. And while I would agree with you that to a certain extent there can be a level of efficiency, because there is a kind of a commonality or a universality of details and profiles and systems. If you really look at historical examples, and you can find, like, for instance, there's a parallel of classical orders that was published by a guy named Donald Ratner, who used to be part of Ferguson, Shamamian, and Ratner.
Right.
And there is this parallel of architectural styles looks at, I'll just say, Doric or Tuscan or Corinthian, any of these architectural styles, but in different regions throughout the world.
Right.
And there's an incredible amount of variety and richness. And there's not really one pure Doric order, if you will, but there certainly are a few that are widely accepted as canonical.
Yeah.
So, when I was working with Tom Beebe, and it wasn't just on that house, but at the time he was working on the Meadows Museum at SMU, Southern Methodist University, which is a very robust brick and stone Georgian museum, and a couple other interesting projects that were going on at the time. But one of the ways that he would work would be looking at a particular classical precedent and sort of slavishly replicating it and applying it to the elevations that were being generated, and then taking note of the areas where that particular execution broke down. And that became an opportunity to start making adjustments to that pure order, and it would become informed by the architecture of the building that we were working on and take on its own unique perspective or ultimate style.
How do you, when you're dealing with clients, they are coming to you and they've got a kind of a clear idea of the style that they're looking for, or are you kind of then responding with does each area that you're working in as well have its own heritage and its own vernacular of classicism, which you're kind of bringing to the forefront, or how does your approach adapt?
Well, being here in Milwaukee, we do a lot of work in lake country. So there are thousands and thousands of lakes, inland lakes, not just Lake Michigan that the city is situated on. And there is kind of a classic or iconic lake house vernacular that we strive for. And so a lot of times, I would say from an architectural character point of view, we strive for a level of anonymity. So the work that we do isn't necessarily immediately identifiable as a Wade Weissmann house.
Right.
It's something that it's a little bit more anonymous than that. And we strive to create something in architecture that really blends into its environment and participates in the local vernacular.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are classical and traditional details that you can find embedded within the local vernacular, but it's not a planning principle that we typically employ unless a client comes to us with a specific request, which is what I think what you were asking about. And maybe you can ask me a little bit more about that.
Well, I guess as well, I'm kind of interested in the ease or the benefits of existing inside of a vernacular tradition, from a delivery standpoint, from marketing standpoints, from planning standpoints, and the benefits of using a vernacular style in terms of being able to deliver higher quality as well. And certainly in the in the past, and I look at kind of old European architecture, falling back into the vernacular was always a safe move in terms of maintaining quality and maintaining standards, because it's there. Whereas modern trends of architecture, like, we're obsessed with reinventing things, and with the reinvention of stuff comes complications and difficulties, and things don't always work.
Well, but I think that even within this traditional architectural or traditional vernacular architecture, there's a tremendous amount of reinvention. I don't think that the work that we do is any easier because it participates in something that's readily identifiable and traditional.
Mm-hmm.
I do think from a sales point of view, it's easier for us to accomplish that kind of work at a very high level because people are familiar with it and are interested in creating something that ultimately I think a lot of us would consider to be timeless in nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But, the creative process for a Northwoods cabin for us is not really any different, I think, than the creative process that somebody like Tom Kundig would
go through,
take on in one of his, modern rustic pieces of architecture in the Northwest.
So what can you tell me about the formation of the business, and how would you describe your role?
The formation of the business. So we have 3 offices currently, one in Pittsburgh, our central studio and the mothership of our, corporate administration is here in Milwaukee. And then we have another satellite office in Santa Barbara. And so I think in Pittsburgh, we've got roughly 5 architects. We have 3 in Santa Barbara, and then we have about 25 or so here in Milwaukee.
Mm-hmm.
My role is as the studio director for Weissmann Architecture. So it's a varied role. I do a lot of business development,
mm-hmm.
cultivating clients from the first phone call, a lot of proposals and work plans, not necessarily the most glamorous side of architecture. And then I do a lot of work with our staff, largely quality control, mentoring young project managers or cultivating interns into a project management position within the organization. And I think that's one of the roles that I really enjoy the most is not just teaching them how to execute a beautiful design, but to do it in a very responsible and almost builderly fashion. So I think that it's incredibly important for a young architect to have an understanding of the needs of a contractor on a job site, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're trying to execute a very high level interior architecture, knowing where every light switch and every mechanical outlet is going to occur on the wall or the ceiling is incredibly important. And sometimes, you're building a space within a space because it requires such a high level attention to detail that you have to learn how to create a level of flexibility or softness in the surrounding spaces in order to execute something at a very demanding design.
Yeah.
And being able to describe in time and space where some of those things need to happen for the design to be pulled off seamlessly is really important for our staff to understand. And so I'm always looking at how something is built, and our construction documents it's a set of instructions, right?
Yeah.
That illustrates how a particular kit of parts is going to be assembled. And the clarity of instruction is incredibly important. The clarity of communication. It's not just a design, but it's a means of communication. And so we're very often looking at how clearly the information is illustrated in the documents and communicated in order to best affect the ultimate design.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yes, and this is quite an art to be able to do this, and it's something that a lot of practices will take a lot of pride in, who are able to do it, and being able to dimension drawings in a certain way that with a contractor, like it's the dimensions that the contractor wants, not the ones that the architect thinks are useful.
Sure, and thinking through, like, okay, I think it's a really great idea to have, I'll just say this giant, element in this space, but, how does it actually get into the space? At what point in time in construction is it even feasible? So, we're always looking at feasibility of construction because, well, we have maybe a little bit different process in terms of how we execute our work. We have a preliminary design or a schematic design contract, and then we get a preliminary construction cost, and typically we'll onboard the contractor very early in the process once the schematic design is complete. And then we will leverage that contractor as we develop the technical documents that are being utilized for construction, because we find when we're working on the East Coast or the West Coast or here in Wisconsin or down in Florida, there are different means and methods that are employed in all of these different locations. And every subcontractor wants to execute their work a little bit differently. And so when we have the contractor onboarded very early in the technical development of the documents, we're able to utilize their experience as we draw, so that we are able to keep a very linear process going through the whole technical documentation phase of work. And I think that really helps us manage our fees and stick to our work plan, because we have the resource of the general contractor and their subcontractors consulting with us as we go.
Do you find that it makes a lot more sense then to avoid competitive tenders from contractors for, it's a lot of energy for contractors to be able to do that. And if you're doing it, bringing on the contractor earlier on, you're able then to have more clarity if you're charging. Do you charge by percentage or do you fix fee?
We actually are a time and material basis. We will frequently utilize a percentage to create a bracketed fee range. So depending on the project, it could be 12 to 14 or a 14 to 16 percentage fee range. But we essentially don't present it as a percentage of construction cost. As you know, just because you're putting a $30,000 bathtub in a bathroom doesn't necessarily mean that there's a lot of additional work that goes into the design to get it there. So a percentage of construction cost is a good loose approximation for calculating our fee, but it's not the basis. It's a time and material basis.
Right. And in terms of managing your fees as you go through the project then, and making sure that you're not overspending or kind of spending too many hours just designing something that doesn't need to be designed to the nth degree. How do you control that? How do you kind of make sure that that is something that's under control?
That's under control. Well, sometimes we go over fee, and we go over fee intentionally because there's something about the design that we feel the need to invest in from a marketing point of view. So the fee is, obviously it's important for us to run a profitable business and to be able to pay our staff a good salary. But the design is really the driving factor for us. And so if we feel that we need to invest additional time into a project, we will do it. But to get back to answering your question, we do a lot of interim check-ins. So when we're working on, say, interior architecture, developing the shell and core of a drawing set, I'm meeting with the staff on a weekly and sometimes daily basis, so that we have an opportunity to really guide our efforts and drive towards interim deliverable goals.
Right.
So it's a pretty actively managed process. I would say we don't ever go more than a week in between meeting with project managers and staff on any given project.
Right.
And then go ahead.
And so when you've negotiated the fees, that's been set. There is a process of essentially, here's our profit margin, here's the fee, the budget available for the team. Then the budget for the team gets translated into hours, which then the project manager kind of controls and distributes.
We do utilize a Deltec project called Agera that we used. We use to track our time, and we do so very granularly. So I would say, since I have started working here, our utilization of that software has increased significantly to the point that we have really good metrics on past projects with regards to how much time we need to devote to the broader overarching phases of schematic design development, construction documents, and construction administration. So we have really good understanding for a lot of different project types, how much time is going to be associated with those different phases of work and other deliverables. Right. And if you know anything about how Agera works, you can get pretty granular with your work plans in Agera in terms of mapping out resources over time. So we do utilize that software a lot to make sure that, okay, well, for instance, sometimes projects can be a little bit sneaky, and you think that it's going to be a slam dunk project, or you think it might be easier than, or take less time than the fee would suggest, just based purely on construction cost. Or there may be another hiccup in terms of whether or not you actually have the resources to apply to the project over that duration of time. As in, can we realistically spend that much fee between now and December when the drawings need to go out? Right. So we analyze the fee from a lot of different points of view. A lot of it is historical. And then, you do have to kind of drill down to the kind of the nitty-gritty details to make sure that your work plan is accurate. But the project managers that we have now are really phenomenal individuals and incredibly skilled at planning out the time for their staff to execute the work. And that's been something that we've been cultivating with them over the duration of my time with the company, over the last almost 8 years or so, has been really trying to build our staff and not play so much to their weaknesses, but really try to play to their strengths, and then ultimately to build up their weaknesses. Essentially, we don't want, just because somebody isn't necessarily a great designer, we still want to give them design opportunities to sort of flex that muscle, because, if all we have are a bunch of mechanics, some of whom are really good at technical drawings and some of whom are good at design drawings, presentation drawings, and some of whom are very client facing, we don't have a really well-rounded staff. We have a lot of people who are really good at doing isolated aspects of the business, and we really want to try and cultivate people to be very incredibly competent, well-rounded architects who, and anybody who knows, who spend any time in the profession, architects wear a lot of hats, and we want to make sure that they all look good in those hats that they have to wear.
Absolutely. You mentioned there as well that part of your roles and responsibilities is business development. How does that look like at Wade Weissmann?
A lot of our work is referred from past clients. Obviously, that's one of the best ways to get a new client, is to keep an old one happy. So we do get a lot of referrals from past clients. We get a lot of inquiries through our website. When an inquiry comes in, we have a team of people who reaches out to that client. We have a sort of a short questionnaire just to understand in better detail, if they're coming in through the website, to get a better understanding of what they're hoping to accomplish, what their budget is, what their time frame is, just to make sure that it's a project that we want to advance internally to the next level of conversation, in which case I'll start to, either myself or another member of the management team will reach out to them individually. We'll talk with them about our process. We have a 20-plus page confidential questionnaire that we provide to each client. And it gets into a lot of lifestyle issues, not just budget and time and style, but how people actually live. And we utilize that to build the program for each house. And we utilize that questionnaire almost as a checklist while we're going through the design process, so that we make sure that we have addressed all of their concerns at the outset.
You have a very beautiful website with some incredible photography and images, well documenting the project. And I'm always interested because the kind of caliber of clients that you're dealing with are often very private, and photography can often become a sticking point for a lot of architects to actually allow the clients to market the built work. Has this been a problem for you guys, or do you have mechanisms that you have to kind of move around that?
Sure, it has been an issue. I'd say some of our best work has never been photographed, and I don't know if it ever will be. And that's always a sad moment in time, when you realize that so much of your time and effort and passion has gone into something, and you don't have a whole lot that you're able to show for it. But by and large, I'd say over 90%, 95% of our clients actually do allow us to photograph the work. Sometimes they don't want it published in a magazine, and that's understandable, but they will allow us to use it internally or on our website. Some clients don't want things posted on social media, and so we'll have a tendency to try and avoid that. Every client has their own specific sensitivities, and we address them, individually.
Yeah,
Okay.
And it's interesting. We've spoken with clients before, architects practices before, where this has been a kind of a complication, and there are certain practices that they will put a bonus completion or a compensation clause inside of their contracts, whereby if the project isn't allowed to be photographed, then the practice receives a form of compensation as a result of not being able to market the work, because
no, we've never done that. We've never done that, but we have gotten to a point contractually where we're not really willing to take on a new project if we're not
Mhm.
able to attend the project over the course of its construction.
Mhm.
So construction administration, I think, has become very important to us, but we've never built in anything with regards to being able to photograph or document the built work into the contract.
Mm.
Now, I don't. There have been times when a client has decided for one reason or another to part ways with us,
Sure.
and they might like to take that design somewhere else and have it executed. And so
Mhm.
obviously there are some limits of liabilities and some intellectual property concerns that we have at that point in time. But other than that, we haven't really tied any kind of recourse or remedy to not being able to document a
Mm.
project.
So, as you were saying there, then the main business development is kind of referrals from doing good work and
Mm-hmm.
past clients. Are there any kind of proactive things that you do, or you encourage the business developers in the office to be doing? Because the type of clientele that you're dealing with, I'm assuming majority, some form of high net worth
Mm-hmm.
individual, and because they can exist in so many different spheres of life, it's a little bit more difficult than, say, well, in many ways there's a challenge here because it's not like sector specific, and an architect that's maybe
We're
doing
not just
restaurant.
doing Kentucky Fried Chickens.
Yeah, exactly. Then
Right.
and these people can exist everywhere, and so it's so broad as to where to be able to find these clients. So what kind of proactive things do you do to kind of facilitate new relationships with your target ideal clients?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think while the bulk of our work is residential in nature, periodically we do get asked to um, participate in some hospitality projects, whether that be a country club,
Hmm.
which is a really great audience for
Yeah.
us to be in front of, even if we don't necessarily get the project, but to have an opportunity to present to the board at a country club or a social club
Hmm.
is a really phenomenal way to find yourself in front of the kind of audience that you'd like to be in front of.
Yeah.
But quite honestly, um, here in Wisconsin in Lake Country, just having your sign on the lakeside of a property when people are on their pontoon cruises and having enjoying their summer is some of the best advertising that you can do.
For sure. For sure. Is there a kind of set of considerations that you have as a practice in terms of caring for this type of high caliber client? Like in terms of the way that you communicate, the way that you you look after the clients, their level of expectation. What sorts of things do you do to kind of
How
nurture?
do we actually make sure that our clients are satisfied over the
Yeah,
course of the project?
yeah,
Well, obviously communication is really huge, but that, I mean, kind of goes without saying. I think that listening is really probably the most important gift that you can give to a client.
hmm
And it's listening not just to the specific details of the request, but there's often something else that's hidden behind it. It's
hmm
like listening for what they want, not just for what they ask for.
right.
And I think that's a particularly difficult skill um, to translate or to pass along to another member of the staff.
I was going to say, is that specifically in terms of the design and interpreting the design request?
Sure. And I mean, that's okay. So if you're talking about trying to listen for a design related issue, whether it's the overarching style of the project or the details for a particular room, we do a lot of work with precedent imagery.
Mm-hmm.
So, our clients will always ask for them to spend time putting together a house or Pinterest or, other kind of board of images. We'll also pull together imagery. We have a huge resource library here in the middle of the office, and we do allow clients to take books home. We have a lending library system established. And so we do spend a lot of time with precedent imagery trying to define a particular look and feel.
Mm-hmm.
But we always tell our clients that it's not just what you do like about a particular design or style. It's oftentimes what you don't like that is as important. So we're very interested in the things that really turn off a client so that we really know how to avoid them.
That sounds obvious, but it's very smart.
It does sound obvious, yeah. But yeah, what a client doesn't like is hugely important.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Is there, again, I kind of circling back to this, like how to nurture the relationship, like how to nurture a deep relationship with a client. And in the past, I've spoken to other practices where they'll talk about moving into this trusted advisor position, which sometimes is not just architectural advice. There's a whole world of other advice that comes into it, and this actually becomes an opening for developing relationships with other people of that, of a client's demographic, if you like. Is there that kind of approach at Wade Weissmann, or how are long-lasting relationships nurtured or cultivated?
That is a good question too. My time at Wade Weissmann's, only been 8 years or so. Wade founded the practice 25 years ago. And we have a lot of clients that go back to childhood friends of his.
Right.
And so, he's done an awful lot to cultivate the clients and the relationships that we have here. There's a lot of lifelong friends and family friends that we continue to service. And it is true that sometimes you take on a different role that's not strictly the professional architectural role when you're working with a client. I mean, when you're working in the realm of residential architecture, as we are, you're working on something that's so deeply personal. In many cases, this is one of the largest investments that these people will make in their lives. But it's also you're participating in creating the space in which their lives will unfold and memories will be made. And it's very important for us to keep that a really positive, enriching, rewarding experience because of the personal connection that creating somebody's family home is. And we take that very, very seriously. We don't get into a lot of arguments with our clients or contractors. It's very important for us to be as collaborative as we can possibly be over the course of the design and construction. And obviously, as good as your designs may be, there are always opportunities for mistakes to occur on the job site. And we're not really... In a lot of cases, we're willing to accept that error, whether it's something that came out of our documents or was a mistake made by somebody on the job site. We're willing to accept that and kind of work with it rather than have the contractor tear it out and start over.
Right.
And we find that if we're able to sort of roll with the punches and take those opportunities to work with the contractors in a creative and collaborative way, when the problems that do inevitably occasionally arise in our documents, we have a lot of goodwill with them. And I think that it's very encouraging for our clients to see that level of workability and that kind of team structure with the general contractors and the subcontractors in keeping the project moving forward, rather than feeling like, well, we just made so much good progress and now we've taken 2 steps back. We've just lost 2 weeks because of this error. If we can keep the project moving forward in a really collaborative and creative way, I think that's one of the ways that we address or cultivate relationships with our clients and the other resources that we bring to our projects.
In terms of your portfolio that you have, as you're saying, you've really been focused on like a specialism of residential, and there's been a bit of hospitality as well that you've done a lot of work in. Has been so focused on a niche, if you like, or a specialism, has that ever put the business under stress, particularly in times of recessions, or have you found that actually being a specialist expert inside of a certain niche has been a strength and helped you weather like recessions? And
yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that's a great question. We are trying to continue to develop a hospitality arm to our practice, or potentially a planning arm to our practice, and that's very exciting because it does open up avenues to other building and construction types. I'd say that in terms of operating within this particular high-end residential arena, that's kind of been a strength for us to be specialized in that regard over the last 2 to 3 years with the global pandemic. Obviously with the lockdowns, there wasn't a lot of work happening, like commercially, for instance, because there was a decentralization out of the cities, where people weren't going downtown and working in offices with a bunch of people. They were spending more time at home, and then they were seeing the various deficiencies that they had in their own home environment. And spending time with family and friends became kind of a major preoccupation. And so with that decentralization, we saw a tremendous rush towards lakefront properties here in Wisconsin, or up north woodland properties. People who were interested in creating multi-generational family compounds or retreats. And so I would say after the second, maybe the third month of the pandemic, we were getting 2, 3, 4 inquiries a week for new work.
Right.
And it's been going like that for the last 3 years. And so in many regards, we've done better than the people who've been working within the commercial and institutional arena. It's certainly better than they were, early on in the pandemic. I think there's been some correction in that regard in the recent past, but it's sad to say that something as tragic as this has been really very good for our business.
Yes, yeah, understood. There's the other aspect of residential, which becomes quite difficult, is that sometimes these kinds of projects are one-offs. Now, obviously, when we're dealing with the ultra high net worths of the world, it might not be, and there might be a string of houses that get built over, a kind of 20-year period, perhaps. But has that been something as well that you've had to navigate, or just be aware of, that it's not as easy as perhaps working with a developer client who's going to be bringing you new work 3 times a year, for example? That these tend to be, as you say, the biggest investment of a person's life, and they might only do it once.
Yeah, it is interesting. You will find in this particular arena of clientele that a lot of them get the itch for design and construction. There are a lot of clients who are one-offs, but we have a lot of clients who are repeat clients because they just really enjoy the process.
Yeah.
So they're still one-off projects because they're doing something unique, but they're doing it somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's a condo renovation downtown, or a lake compound, or a house in Park City.
Mhm.
You have a lot of opportunities for multiple one-offs for the same clients.
Yeah.
We do a little bit of work with developers. We're trying to cultivate relationships with developers in other marketplaces,
Mhm.
where will provide some eyewash, if you will, some plans, some renderings to facilitate a relationship, to help them sell a property,
Mhm.
and try and utilize that to convert what would be the developer's client, or buyer, and convert that into someone who might be a client for us.
Mhm. Got it.
So there is a little bit of time that we spend with developers that have property but no client attached, and we try and facilitate that relationship for them in that way.
Is there a lot of speculative work that happens, or spec houses that are built? So you're building a house
Not a
for
lot.
that? Not a lot. Oh.
Not a lot. Some, like I said, we'll do that for a developer or a real estate agent, but if you're not really being compensated, or being compensated at the rate in which you would be compensated for
Mhm.
a normal project, there's not a lot of financial interest in doing it. So it'll depend on whether the property itself is really exceptional, or we have a relationship with that person and we're trying to facilitate something for them or help them out. But we do have to keep that sort of initiative to a minimum, because we can't really displace paying projects and clients with something that is speculative. But we will do it from time to time. Again, it's a kind of a case by case basis.
Sure, sure. In terms of the way that you guys, going back to kind of talking about fees and the way that you set your fees, how do fees get negotiated with clients? And again, I use the idea that a lot of the time, particularly in the world of high end residential, we're dealing with titans of industry, people who have accomplished a lot, who are very successful in business, and they're
Sure.
probably some of the fiercest negotiators on the planet.
Yeah, they certainly can be.
So how do you kind of like deal with that?
Well, that. Yeah, so they do negotiate. They certainly do. It kind of depends a little bit on how much work we have in the office at the time. It's a supply and demand sort of thing, and sometimes the supply of money is limited, and and you have to make a deal. When you're flush with work, we're less inclined to make that particular concession.
Mhm.
So it definitely depends on, are we taking a project because we need to keep somebody occupied, or are we taking a project because it is a client who we've worked with in the past and they have something significant that they want to do? And for instance, if a client wants to move really quickly and we have to fast track a project, that frequently will come with a premium. And so we have less of an ability to make a concession on our fees if time is something that has to be sped up, if you will, in executing a project.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Okay. Great. Just looking at the structure of the company, there's how many of you in the leadership? Four of you in the leadership team.
Yeah, there are currently 4. Actually, there will be 5 soon. We had a team of 5, and we have one of our management team was diagnosed with a pretty serious illness and had to take a medical leave of absence. And so on top of balancing what's a very dynamic work environment already, particularly with the pace of work that we've had to undertake, we lost one member of our management team who was a real facilitator of staffing. She was our staffing coordinator.
Mhm.
And she had the ability to look ahead, many months, almost a year into the future, and understand how we would need to be able to move staff from one project to the next to the next. And so we've had to transition some of that responsibility to additional individuals in the company. And so while it's nice to have that level of redundancy of knowledge or that skill set, it's definitely put a strain on us. So the current leadership team is Wade, myself as the studio director. We have Bridget, who's our controller, and then we have Kate, who is our executive business strategist. And so essentially under Wade's guidance, myself, that I work with Wade and our design director, and actually executing the project, sort of the day-to-day. Bridget obviously is looking after the financial health of the company and how each job is specifically performing financially. And then Kate, in conjunction with Wade, spend time focused on the overall trajectory strategically of the company. Is there another market that we want to be addressing? Is there something about a compensation package, that we need to address with the staff? What a specific marketing initiative for a special client might look like.
So do Bridget, the controller, and Kate, business strategist, were they architects, or they come in purely from their own disciplines?
Kate is an architect.
Okay.
She went to the University of Notre Dame. She essentially heads the studio in Pittsburgh. Bridget is our controller. She had worked for, I'd say the closest parallel was a company called ABC, American Building Supply, something like this, here in Wisconsin. And she worked in that same controller role with ABC, and essentially helped to build that company. So she has an experience essentially in cultivating talent and managing organizations to help to create growth opportunities. But her background really is, as a controller, it's more financial. She's taken some of the responsibility in staffing because with Agera, where you're able to, you're tying time you're tying time to a project. She is helping essentially navigate staffing because of her familiarity or facility with that particular piece of software that we use to organize our office.
Great. And what's in store for the rest of the year and looking ahead for 2023?
Ooh, goodness, what's in store for the rest of the year? We are really trying to, bulk up with as much work as we possibly can. I mean, obviously, it's a sensitive time historically here in the world with coming out of the pandemic and dealing with, inflation and potential recession, looming on the horizon. We want to make sure that, we have the right kinds of projects to keep the company viable and to take care of the staff that we have. I think, as well as anybody does, that recruiting right now is exceptionally difficult. It's hard to find the kind of talented staff that we need to be able to execute the kind of work that we do. And so, not just cultivating, but retaining the staff that we have is really important. And so obviously, we want to do everything that we can to make sure that we have the kind of backlog and workflow to keep our company intact.
Do you find it's difficult to find people that have got a good skill set in the kind of traditional language or the traditional vernaculars that you're using? And do you find it difficult, to attract people to come into a traditional vernacular style of architecture?
It's not so hard to attract people to this particular kind of work. It's harder to find people with the experience.
Right.
So, with the University of Notre Dame in Indiana, not too far from us here, I think we could attract a pretty steady, and have attracted a pretty steady stream of students from Notre Dame, some of whom have been with us and of course also UWM here in Milwaukee, that have been with us for, I think the longest term employee that we have right now is 17 or 18 years, which is pretty significant.
Yeah, that's great.
And I would say, the average is probably 8 to 10 years right now for most of our staff. It really is amazing. And I mean, you can't easily replace that.
No.
It's easy to recruit somebody, but we're going to be most of the people that we're able to recruit, are essentially just coming out of school. It's a lot easier to attract. It's just a lot harder for us here in Milwaukee to recruit people in that 8 to 10 year experience range.
Sure.
And certainly almost impossible to replicate that when it's lost.
Yeah. So what are some of the kind of keys, do you think, for you to keep that kind of talent in-house? Having somebody stick around for 17 years is
opportunities for advancement, cultivating a skill set, making sure that people are constantly growing, I just don't think that you can underestimate that enough. You have to be able to provide opportunities and an understandable and clear path forward for advancement in the company, new responsibilities. I mean, when somebody learns something and they have an opportunity to teach it to somebody else, that's a very gratifying thing. And so we have people that I've been mentoring over the last 8 years, now able to provide that kind of experience and mentorship to the younger staff that are working with them on their projects. And I think that's a very gratifying thing for all of them.
Do you have like a kind of explicit process of defining a growth plan or a career path for employees?
Well, we do have a kind of a published outline of the individual roles that exist within the organization and what the expectation of say a senior design associate, what they would be expected to be able to accomplish or manage. So that there is an outline that explains when you are capable of performing X, and doing that competently, managing your fee and your staff, the next step up is, Y, this job description here.
Yep. Brilliant. I think that's the perfect place to conclude the conversation. Tom, I've thoroughly enjoyed speaking with you today.
Wonderful.
And you've been incredible in sharing some insights into Wade Weissmann and the work that you do and how you complete your projects. So thank you.
Wonderful.
Very much.
Thank you, Ryan. I've enjoyed the opportunity to talk with you.
Awesome. And that's a wrap. And don't forget, if you want to access your free training to learn how to structure your firm or practice for freedom, fulfillment, and profit, please visit smartpracticemethod.com. Or if you'd like to speak to one of our advisors directly, follow the link in the information. The views expressed on this show by my guests do not represent those of the host, and I make no representation, promise, guarantee, pledge, warranty, contract, bond, or commitment, except to help you be unstoppable.